yourself how you want to, and thanks, Adam, for recording.
Didn't mean to interrupt you. This meeting's recorded, by the way.
Yeah.
Great. I will first say thank you guys so much for having me. I was saying, I'm based out of DC, so it's nice to be included in a Boston group. It feels like the closest thing to travel since the pandemic. So I'm really happy you're having me. I'm gonna see if I can get my PowerPoint up here. Can everybody see the screen okay?
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah, so about myself. I have a PhD in computational neuroscience, and I was studying the visual system, and I got really into computer vision and neural networks. And then I started hanging out with some cybersecurity people, and I moved to the consulting world, and I worked for Booz Allen, a defense contractor, for a long time. And I feel like it was like this untouched application of using data science and deep learning for cybersecurity. From there, I ended up at NVIDIA, also working on cybersecurity and data science. And I feel this comes up in this talk a couple of times, but I think my life story is like this interest in deep learning and then wanting to apply it to something and then finding out that that's not the answer at all. And I've learned this lesson like 100 times, and I'll continue to learn it, I think, for the rest of my career. And you could learn it with me today during this talk. So the agenda I have, I'm going to tell you about my team at NVIDIA and how we're accelerating all kinds of data science, not just deep learning on the GPU. I'm going to talk about the challenges of cybersecurity, and then a little case study with intrusion detection using LSTMs, and then also talk about large pre-trained language models with Cyberlogs. And then I know that we are leaving a lot of time for questions at the end, but I'm one of those people, like, if you have an exciting question or like I'm being unclear about something, please unmute and jump in. I'm totally happy to answer questions during the talk. Great. So we'll start off with GPU accelerated data science. So my team, it's an open source project with NVIDIA and this other company, Blazing SQL, are the main contributors. And the idea is that if we put all our data in GPU memory and do all of our data science on the GPU, it will be much faster than copying it back and forth from host to get it into like whatever your GPU accelerated model is. Like, I'm sure you're all familiar, like deep learning models are, really accelerated on GPUs because there's so much parallelism, matrix multiplication. And the same is for like XGBoost and a lot of other ML algorithms, but they all suffer from this, pre-processing and IO and stuff that happens where you're writing back and forth from like CPU to GPU. It really slows things down. So the whole concept is just this end-to-end GPU data science pipeline. And this makes more and more sense as like GPU memory is getting less and less expensive. And so you can actually hold really, really large data sets in GPU memory. And we also work with Dask. So even if you still have too much data outside of memory, you can, through different avenues using Dask, you can still run it through this pipeline, even while it's not all held in memory at the same time. And I sent some links. So I know what you want, and it's to play with this. It's really fun, right? Like, like running something in pandas and then running something in rapids and seeing how fast it is like a great hobby. And there's two ways I recommend getting your hands on this. And I sent both the links to Sarah. One is there's a Docker container on Kaggle that you can run in their like notebooks. I guess they used to be called kernels, but now they're notebooks. So you can play with it there. We also have on the Rapids team are a whole bunch of Kaggle grandmasters. So there's lots of cutting edge sort of stuff happening there on Rapids. So if you just use the search bar on Kaggle for Rapids, you'll find a lot of resources. The other is this app.blazingsequel.com. It's really similar to Google Colab. And we used to be on, I mean, you can still try us out in Google Colab. The thing about Rapids is you need a GPU that's Pascal architecture or newer. So it's like, it's not the newest of the new, but it's like a modern GPU. And the way Google Colab works is it's kind of a lottery of how good the GPU you get every time you run it. So you can test out our stuff on Colab, it may or may not work. But if you try it on Blazing SQL, they'll give you a great GPU backend every time. And both of these are free if you don't have the GPU resources to get started.
And I'll interrupt briefly to let folks know that the links are also on the meetup page, the event, if you want to find them.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and you can also, though, if you have a GPU, feel free to, we have Docker containers, you can conda install it, you can run it at home. So just like a little taste of how difficult it is to switch over to using Rapids. This is, your CPU-based clustering is probably familiar to some of you with your data science. You load in a data set into a pandas data frame, and then you use scikit-learn to do a fit predict. And so this is the lift that you'll have to switch to Rapids. You import cuDF instead of pandas, and you import QML instead of scikit-learn. And there's not 100% parity because we've had to redesign some of the algorithms to accelerate them on GPUs. But for the most part, you should be able, with very minimal code changes, switch over your current pipelines to Rapids. And you get a great performance increase. So this is, I don't want to like dwell on how amazing Rapids is. I hope you just like take my word for it and test it out. But it's fast. This chart here is GPU speed up over CPU, right? So the larger the data that you're running through, the faster it is once you move it over to GPU. And I'll share these slides with Sarah afterwards if you want to like dig through all this. But so I showed you, for like regular pandas operations, joining and merging, it's really fast. For these scikit-learn-esque operations that we're moving to QML, these are all speed up numbers too. So for all these algorithms, you'll see a dramatic speed up if you switch over to Rapids. And then we also have Coup Graph, which is kind of the equivalent of Network X. And depending on the graph algorithm that you're using, you'll see a really big performance increase switching over to Rapids. And this is like the larger visual, the top line corner is like the old way of dealing with big data and this data science pipeline. You have a lot of like read and writes back and forth. I don't know, I used to work with, I remember before using Spark with Hadoop. So those were the very dark ages. And then, Spark in memory processing, which I'm assuming most of you use for like really big data problems. Just switching over to a traditional GPU where you're still writing back and forth, it saves you a lot of time. But if you move to Rapids, where you were on Apache Arrow, so there's no reading back and forth, you can have the same code with like a 50 to 100% improvement or 100x improvement in time. And this is our like tongue-in-cheek diagram of how your day could be drastically improved if you just accelerated your data science workflows. So your CPU powered workflow, if you're working with a large data set and you forget to add a feature, or you're playing around with something and you have to continually like reload it, start ETL again, kind of do feature engineering. It's all like super time consuming, and you're kind of getting lots of coffees and wasting lots of time. And the selling point is that you can do a lot more with your large data sets a lot faster. if you switch over to Rapids. So I don't want to spend too much time here, but I just want to say it's like a community effort, and you know, this isn't to like naysay about scikit-learn. Like, I love scikit-learn, and so we haven't replicated the entire library. And if there's something that you're using and you have like a good use case for wanting us to add it to Rapids, you can make a GitHub issue, and we'd be happy to talk to you about it. We can't recreate everything, so we're really trying to put our finger on like what would be the best for the community, like what people would actually use. So if you don't see your algorithm on here, like, let me know. I can definitely put it in either two. This is the QML algorithms, and then these are the Coup Graph algorithms that we have, and these are online too. So just to end up in my little Rapids pitch, like I said, you can Docker install, conda install. It's available on most cloud instances. If you just want to play with it for free, I would suggest that Blazing SQL app, because they actually give you like a strong backend GPU to play with. And we have lots of content online that you can check out. Yeah, or you can reach out to me later if you have any questions. Great. So I'm part of a subgroup of Rapids, where we're solely focused on using Rapids to accelerate cybersecurity use cases. And cybersecurity is super interesting. I think at least I find it incredibly interesting. And I think at the heart of it is it's a data problem, right? So there's all these high velocity data streams that come into, you know, your security operations center, your SOC or your SIM. And it's coming from lots of different appliances that are on your network, lots of different sensors. And you kind of have to like integrate them across all these different things that people are using. And as a data scientist, I was at my first real experience with this. I was, you know, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed that like data science was the answer. I don't even, you know, it doesn't matter what the question is. And I was embedded in an advanced threat hunt team. And these are just, you know, experts that know a lot of indicators of compromise, kind of these rules that you see that you would alert to, that something malicious was happening on the network. And they were really, really good at their jobs. And a lot of their job was like opening new tabs and digging through like 10 different sources of information to drill down on like an alert or something crazy they saw on the network. And they were not scared at all that data science was going to take over their jobs, because it was too complex to explain to anyone. Like it's a human job. It is something that a human brain is good at, because you can remember all the things at your disposal that you can use to enrich your data. And you know, you're tapped into like these random blog posts that you saw yesterday, and that's what you're going to use to like hunt down this alert or something. So I think the closer you are to cybersecurity, one, the more you realize can just be gained by accelerating the workflows of these humans that are doing the cyber analysis. And two, when you can find a use case for data science, it's like the best feeling in the world, right? Like you picked out the chunk of the problem that you could actually use data science to solve. So that's why it's exciting. And there's also, I want to say there's a shortage of professionals. So none of these people's jobs will be replaced because there's not even enough of them. And the problem, I think, you know, in the US is we're a prime target from lots of nation states that are only becoming more empowered. And there'll be a continuous number, an increase in the number of breaches. And another problem is that the attack surface is ever increasing. And I'm sure you all can imagine, like with everyone working from home and people, bring your own device on your network and all kinds of things that like enterprise teams are having to deal with right now. And it's funny, like whenever there's a new big breach or something, people usually come up with the solution is like more data. We'll like, if we collected this much more data, we would have found this sooner, or if we added these sensors to the network. And so it's just like multiplying, right? It's like inception of data. It's data all the way down. Yeah, so but that also makes it really fun because there's lots of opportunities to have a big impact on this problem. So, let me see. Sorry, I moved my little window. So my team on Rapids, they're actually called CLX, CLX, stands for Cyberlog accelerators. And our idea is not to have like some end-all package solution to solve cybersecurity. And it's rather to just join with the existing systems that people have and to work with the data scientists and the cyber analysts. I feel like it goes both ways now, where like you used to see more siloed data scientists, more siloed cyber analysts, and now cyber analysts aren't afraid to learn more about data science, and data scientists aren't afraid to learn more about cybersecurity. So we want to empower those people to make custom AI solutions for their own enterprise, right? We don't want to host all your models or anything or tell you how to do your job. We just want to make it easier for you to build something and have it actually running on your network. Obviously, GPU accelerated. So, I wasn't going to talk. This is a paper that my boss published, I think 2 years ago, and I wasn't going to bring it up. They're just talking about Sarah about how much fun it is when people kind of like are more real about what it's like to do data science and try to solve problems, and where you fail, where your great idea failed. And so I told my boss I was talking about his paper as a failure of like data science, and he didn't care. Anyway, so this is a case study where we're trying to find intrusion, these different attacks in this data set that is full of Netflow. So I know like you guys are not all involved with cyber data, so I'll take this one a little slow. So flow data, essentially, we're talking about network data where you have a device on your network that's connecting to another device. You have like a source and a destination, IP, and it's connecting via a specific port. And there's different number of packets being transferred, different bytes. There's lots of information. So even without this flow data doesn't necessarily contain the packet information. It's like packet header information. So it has all this metadata about the information that's being sent over your network. And there's this great data set from the Canadian Cyber Institute that has they ran all these different attacks on the data and collected the flows that were generated while these attacks were run. And then also had like 25 computers that were doing quote unquote benign activities. And this is like pretty common in cybersecurity research that if you're publishing something that's not on real data at all, which is a problem in and of itself as compared to like, computer vision, where there's rarely privacy reasons you can't share like a large object detection data set or something. So it's kind of an issue with cybersecurity, but for publishing, it's nice at least to have something that you can use as a benchmark. And so the idea was to take all this flow data, this like communication between different devices on the network, and turn it into some sort of language. And I think that, if you try to think about this problem and you're like, I have all these individual flow lines, right? If you look at table 1, there's web attack XSS, 652 of these flow lines, contain this attack. And it's not going to be something really that a rule or heuristic could pick up, right? It's maybe you could draw some sort of threshold that like, oh, if your bytes are really high, but your packets are really low, you could imagine there's like a couple rules that you get out of this information, but not a whole lot. And the real heart of these attacks is that it's a string of communication going back and forth between different devices. And so like, how can you turn these individual like rows of this data frame into this like back and forth kind of language? And so the idea was just to take the features that you find in this Netflow and turn it into kind of a sequence, like it's called the sequencizer, right? And it contains your source and your destination, and then it contains all this information about ports and bytes and packets, and then it spans over a rolling window. So I think it was I don't remember exactly, maybe it's like 25 pieces, words across this language, and it rolls through time, so you pick up everything. And the idea is what's making something malicious would be picked up through this aggregation of these different Netflow lines. And of course, if you're going to go through all this trouble to try to do kind of this sophisticated analysis, you would then feed it into like an LSTM model, which is a neural network model. And what's great about this paper is that, so it uses this, large neural network, LSTM, but also at the same time, it's generating all of these different sequences, and they just count how frequently that sequence appears in they start off, the thing about this data set, I think, is the first day is the baseline day and there's no attacks. So you take the baseline day, and then you just compare the number of times these like quote unquote sentences occur in the benign data set. And if it's never occurred before or rarely occurred in that sequence, you could get flagged for anomalous behavior. And so I don't know if you guys can see like the arrow on my screen, but no. Okay, so if you look, the bold in the table is the highest AUC per row, and just as like a reminder of this measurement. So essentially, if you track true positive rate, this little ROC chart at the bottom, true positive rate on the Y, and false positive rate on the X, you want a 50-50 guess is that orange dotted line, and that would be an AUC of 0.5. And then the blue line shows higher accuracy. And so you would, if your blue line touched like the outer corner in the area under the curve, the AUC was 1, that would be like a perfect. So you can see that there's a lot of times where we're comparing this LSTM model to just this frequency model, and the frequency model is winning. The frequency model is better than running this through the same thing through a neural network. And I think that's great. So one of the things that we're doing as part of Clicks is we have a lightweight online anomaly detection. We're building out LODA. So it's essentially like statistical anomalies. So it's how can we better just like track statistical anomalies and accelerate them on RAPIDS. So this is great, right? This isn't a problem for me in my job. I don't have to use like an LSTM, but I'd love to, right? Like, so what can we do using large language models or other neural networks? Like, I think this is my, I guess, most philosophical part of this talk. And
Rachel, can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
Rather than wait for the end. Do you have a sense of kind of like why, or how can someone guess ahead of time that maybe frequency or, these kind of simple metrics would be, would perform better? Or do you just have to kind of do it out and compare and see?
That's a good question. I think, yeah, I mean, I'm the type of person that just wants my hands on the data to like test stuff. But I also think there's multiple solutions like for the same problem. And sometimes these like toy data sets can lead you astray. So like if it just because it's published on this Canadian data set that it was more effective in that way, it doesn't mean that on your computers, on your network, that it's like not the right solution for you. So you should, yeah, like play around with it. But I think something that's even more interesting than the statistical stuff is if you're actually talking with your threat hunters, is to use the real baseline is how are their rules performing, right? Like if you're not outperforming in the rules, who cares if you're using like statistics and stuff? So like I think maybe a lesson they don't teach you in school is like the baseline for a lot of data science stuff isn't like a logistic regression, right? It's what are the actual people doing right now? What's their like, how are they solving this problem right now? Because you can beat lots of different like data science methods, but you might not be beating the like actual real world methods. I don't, that probably does, I answered your question with like, it doesn't, it depends.
No, I think that's great. And that's such a good point too, that these data sets that are kind of developed maybe don't have the complexity that the real world does.
They 100% don't. Yeah, I think it's guaranteed that they don't.
Quick question, if I may.
Yeah.
What's the frequency model? What is that?
Right. So it's in the paper. I don't know the exact calculation, but essentially, if I take all this flow data and I turn it into these sentences that are 25 tokens in length, and then I just, each one of those, every time that exact sentence appears, I give it like a tally of 1. And the frequency model is just, if there's things that are appearing, those sentences appear over and over and over again, I'm going to assume that they're benign. And if I've never seen that sequence before, where I have this type of communication back and forth, then I'll assume that it's malicious or an anomaly.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Is that okay? Great.
Yeah.
But this applies, I don't want to like derail too far, but that applies to like a lot of other stuff that's not Netflow. Like so there's like these DLL files or like exe files that would get executed. And a lot of times malware will take like the name of a good file and they'll be running it from some crazy location. And that's like, if you can track the directory, like where these files are running, you could say like, oh, like, excel.exe never runs out of the temp folder. Like you don't keep it there, right? And so maybe that's not really Excel and maybe I'd want to flag that. And I came across this same issue when I built another NLP model that like tracked subdirectories and all this stuff, but really all you needed to do was count the number of times you see Excel exe running in a normal place, and then if it's in a place you haven't seen before, you would flag that. So it's another like frequency kind of application that works better than the NLP model I tried to use. That was in an old job. Okay. So yeah, so this is my philosophical question. Is like, when is there more to an anomaly than it just being like a statistically rare event? And I don't have like, you can sleep on this. I don't have like a great answer. And I think, but the path that I'm leading down is that if you had a knowledge base that represented like more information, then maybe you could see an anomaly without doing like these frequency statistics. So I think maybe for now, the answer is that it's an anomaly could just be associated with less frequent things in like a larger pre-trained model that's like more universal. But I still don't have like a great answer to this question. We could maybe talk about it in Q&A. But going down this path of let's see what kind of pre-trained models and information we can get and apply that to something with cybersecurity. So I was just like a super distilled version of what a BERT model is. So it's this large language model that gets trained on just a huge corpus. So the original BERT model is they fed it Wikipedia and a bunch of other stuff. And essentially they asked this large neural network they would mask a word in the middle, like 10% of the words, and they asked it to predict the masked word, and they trained it over and over. So what the model was essentially learning is like something about the context of these words, right? So it would learn, it could differentiate between words with multiple meanings, because when it saw it in the sentence, they would know, like a bank that has to do with money versus like a bank down by the river, right? There's all this context that the model is learning by being trained this way. And then once you have these pre-trained models that take a long time, they're really big, you can fine tune them on like a labeled task. So this example here, they're taking this big pre-trained model that has this like language understanding and teaching it what's spam and not spam. And this is sort of like transfer learning, right? Where you don't need a whole lot of training data if your model already has this like understanding of the corpus. And so my idea, since I'm at NVIDIA and GPUs are easy to get a hold of, was to train a BERT. Okay, was to train a BERT on cyber data, but not just like, if you've seen Cyberlogs, they look like exactly what I was talking about with like Netflow. There's like IP addresses and all this stuff. So like that didn't seem exactly right. So my corpus, like the data I was using, I used all of English Wikipedia, but I also used like the largest public log data set I could find just from this GitHub, this log parsing AI. And so I trained Cybert to then hopefully have like a leg up on whatever next task I wanted to use, that I could have this like pre-trained model. And there's so many BERTs, and just, it's really fun to try to keep track of them. This is like an old diagram. But so obviously Cybert was like the natural evolution of this project, but it's taken on more meanings and we've trained more models with just BERT. But someone on my team made a logo and we're like totally stuck with Cybert right now. But the downstream tasks, right, that I've fine-tuned Cybert to do include log parsing. So, logs for, I was saying, there's all these different appliances and they get updated, and there's all kinds of like heterogeneous logs coming in for cybersecurity. So although it's like not as glamorous as finding like a malicious attack on your network, having a really robust way to parse logs, especially when you don't know what kind they are, is actually really useful for people. So this is like a decent application of this like large language model and all these GPU resources. The other named entity recognition task, if you're not familiar, like named entity recognition in human language tasks just means like, if you have a sentence, you can pull out New York as a location, or like Sarah as a person, stuff like that. So instead, we just flip that for these cyberlogs to have the different fields that you would parse out. Your regex parser would regularly parse out. And then we also used it for PII identification. It worked well there. Something that I think is like probably the best use of this is just general log classification, because a lot of people have really fast regex parsers, and they just don't know what kind of log, exactly the subtype of log that they're parsing. So we trained it to just do the log identification, and then it can get routed where it needs to go there. We also have a phishing detection use case. I think that probably makes the most sense, because if we adjust the whole email, we're getting a lot of human language in there too. And then we've used it for like error log analysis, where we have a team that, they get these huge dumps of error logs, and they're just trying to find the useful information, not necessarily malicious information, but like, this is sort of the information that helped me last time when I was combing through these error logs to find what was wrong. And so once we get some labeled data of like what a helpful line in an error log is, we trained Cyber to label those for people. It's been useful there. And so I don't have like the best solution to like how Cyber is going to solve like cybersecurity problems. Definitely not, but it's going to accelerate a lot of people's workflows. And something that's kind of like an offshoot of this is when it does any of these tasks, unlike a regex parser that will just like not give you anything if the log is degraded or something is wrong with it, or it's the wrong parser, Cyber emits these confidence scores. So you can kind of use them as a monitoring service of like, if your logs are drastically changing, or there's something really new on the network that it like can't parse or something. So you can kind of use it to monitor your logs there, and maybe further downstream that would like alert you to some malicious activity. And I'm definitely interested to talking to you guys about, if you were in cybersecurity, any sort of pain points that I could steer this towards. Or also, if you're not in cybersecurity, I know everybody deals with logs, like they're a universal like 2021 problem. So if you have any just like log pain points, I'm also happy to talk about those. And then, so this is like part of the RAPIDS ecosystem. So obviously, I'll go back. So the BERT model, Cyber, we built it using Hugging Face and PiTorch. So it was always going to be on the GPU. It was always going to be faster. But we found like what we could do was build it's called a tokenizer to turn these strings into integers. So these deep learning models, it's a lot of like matrix multiplication, and they don't take in strings, they take in integers. So we built a really fast GPU tokenizer so that all the pre-processing before it gets to the model is faster. So kind of going back to this RAPIDS ecosystem where like, of course, the deep learning model is on the GPU, but also what about all those pre-processing steps? And so we move those to the GPU as well. Yeah, so this is kind of my wrap up, but I'm really excited we have time for Q&A. These are the RAPIDS ecosystem partners, and it's a totally open source project. So if you want to contribute or just adopt and work with us on adoption, and we're also partnered with a bunch of other open source projects. Like I said, we're built on Apache Arrow, and then Blazing SQL is so cool. You should really check them out. You can do like SQL queries on your S3 bucket like faster than you could. If that is your pain point, is like slow SQL queries, like those are the guys to talk to. They're really cool. But yeah, and there's some more resources on where you can find us. Code donations always welcome, but also just like pull requests. And like I said, any sort of feature requests are really good for our team as well. And yeah, just wanted to thank you for having me. Thanks everybody for coming.
Great, thanks, Rachel. This was a really great talk. Yeah, we'll unmute and clap. I don't know if that'll work or not. Or you can just, yeah, the clapping reaction. So there were a couple questions that came in on Slack. So I know the two people who posted those questions aren't shy. If you want to unmute yourself and read them out, go ahead. If you want me to read them, I can do that too.
Sure, I could ask them or ask mine if you want. So yeah, and great talk. I really liked it. So I had a couple questions, I guess, just about interoperability and like if you like train models on your kind of rapid system, how easy is it to switch back and forth kind of with other things, like I trained like a model, say like maybe a PiTorch model or something like that, and then using rapids, and then I want to do just inference on a CPU. Is there any like code adjustments I'd have to make besides the normal like PiTorch things that I'd make anyways? Or is there any kind of overhead going between those?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. So your PiTorch model is the same. Rapids doesn't train PiTorch models. The ideas were just kind of wrapped around it. So if you switch over to like your model, all your pre-processing is in Rapids, there's a good chance you could go like 1-for-1 replace Coup Graph with pandas. But I can't guarantee that you won't find, like, depending on exactly what your pre-processing is, you might have to like sub out a couple different, like some of our functions take in extra variables or like things need to be specified that way. But it shouldn't be a large lift to switch back and forth like the pre-processing and the post-processing. The other thing, yeah, so your model file is exactly the same. You just use whatever PiTorch model file you have. And you can move from a Coup Graph tensor, it's like essentially like a pandas data frame, instead of going to like, I don't know if you're using like a PiTorch data loader or something, you can use Coup Graph to go, it's called DLPack, straight into a tensor. So you don't have to go to CPU before you go into your PiTorch model.
Okay.
As opposed from like pandas to like NumPy or whatever you're doing now to get into PiTorch.
Okay, so in that I just write that logic, say in my normal like PiTorch data set or something like that. So
yes.
Okay.
Yep, all that's the same.
Okay. Thanks.
I can sort of rephrase my question. I forget the slide that you were presenting on, but you sort of described Netflow data in detail. And I've never thought about Netflow data and the concept of machine learning, but I do regularly read VPC flow logs and like send them to various places in AWS to do. I really don't know why I'd spend time looking at VPC flow logs, but some things. I currently have like a multi-cloud environment with tens of millions of users that hit different endpoints on a regular basis, but I'm not doing any intrusion detection on that at all because I work in ed tech and ed tech is not finance or defense. But it would be neat to send that data that I already have to something interesting and to like just mess around with it in something like Rapids. So I Googled 6 different variations and I found like a Jupyter notebook that says, how do I load VPC flow logs or Netflow data in general into Rapids? Do you have any suggestions for like next steps for playing around with VPC flow logs specifically, or like a push button thing that I can just get cool things out of Amazon using Rapids?
Yeah, there's we have a notebook. So in the Clicks repo, there's different notebooks, and one is a periodicity detection, and it I think it builds. There's a periodicity detection that I think accepts Netflow. There's also an asset classification / network mapping, but it doesn't. I don't think it's set up right now for Netflow, but it was like, if you gave it the right fields, I think you could do like a network mapping. I can scope it out and maybe add it
Yeah.
to the Slack channel later.
I found, like, this is archived, but flow classification _rapids.fimb that talks about some of it. But if you have any other resources, please do link it in the Slack channel.
Yeah, I'll definitely circle back on that.
Any other questions? Go ahead and unmute yourself or raise your hand.
I have a quick one. Did you, so first of all, thank you for the excellent talk, and I'm sure I'll be using Rapids a lot in the future. Didn't know that that existed. Did you do any host-based intrusion detection? In addition, I know you shared your boss's paper, which looked like it was all network-based intrusion detection. I ask because I think the finding he was expecting with the frequency base underperforming the LSTMs is true in the host-based setting.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So we're currently working on like host introspection, where we have a lot of host data. But we haven't taken his old paper model and applied it there. But we are actually seeing a lot of interesting stuff with graph networks. So we're mapping process trees and then using like CNN comparisons of different graph process trees. And we do see that also outperforming the frequency stats. It's also, I think the baseline is easier for frequency stuff on network detection and harder on hosts, just because individual hosts are so random that it's like, as a population, Netflow makes more sense. Like there's only so many things like everyone can do, but like when you look at individual hosts, there's just a lot more variation. So it is like where frequency kind of fails, and that's what we're seeing. It'll probably be Rapids releases. We release every 6 weeks. So host introspection is probably a couple releases away, but it'll go up on that repo.
Excellent, thank you.
Hey, Rachel, thanks so much for the talk. I have a couple questions around, I guess, from the perspective of someone who might be using Cybert and clicks in a kind of professional setting. Before that, I just wanted to say, I really appreciate that graphic you included. That was like the Bert with the half cyborg face. Very, very cool way to characterize it. Yeah, anyway, so when I've seen Bert used a lot of the time, it's kind of just used like you tokenize your data or whatever, you pass it through Bert and you get these really good embeddings from that. And then maybe you pass that to some sort of downstream, maybe it's a classifier or just, something else that, so kind of using it as like feature extraction. So is that kind of how you see it being used a lot of the time, or does it also have maybe like an end-to-end sort of capability where it's also doing the classification or whatever task you're going to be asking of it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think, yeah, like obviously if you just extract the embeddings, then that'll speed up your inference time by a lot, rather than like running through the whole, oh my god, it's like 32 layers, I don't know, it's a lot. So yeah, if you can get good accuracy with just extracting the embeddings. I know the Spacey library is the one that does that, where they have like all these regular classifiers set up, and you can just like, is that what you're using?
Something like that. Yeah. It's and I've seen like for like the NER kind of stuff, maybe you'll do something like an LSTM or like a CRF sort of thing for the sequence tagging, but then maybe you feed in the embeddings from the BERT model, for example, or that kind of thing. So yeah, just like, I guess that modularity a little bit of combining different approaches can be useful for a lot of these things.
Yeah, I would say you can try it on your use case to see if it gets the accuracy you need. But in the end, so the repo that I plug, that's like the future, that's not NVIDIA related at all, it's called Hugging Face. I don't know if you.
Yes, I'm definitely very familiar with Hugging Face.
So they have, you can train whatever, you can fine tune it for like question answering, whatever, and they actually add it onto the model. So you get full BERT or full whatever you're using. And then what you're missing if you just add like a logistic regression after a BERT embedding or something is you could do like fully connected layers at the end, which you won't see, like, but if your embedding works and that's enough, then like go for it. But yeah, I just want to go on the record as plugging Hugging Face. They're like totally phenomenal. It's really open source. And they have people are putting data sets up there, and also like as these new language models come out, they usually have implementations up there pretty quickly. And you can host, they have an S3 bucket. If you want to load your own models, they'll host them for you. So not affiliated with Rapids. We're intercompatible. You should check them out. And their logo is like the Hugging Face emoji. So yeah.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I can also speak from experience. Hugging Face is amazing. And one more quick follow-up question. So I know you mentioned in terms of actually creating this model, the training corpus was Wikipedia, and then this open source log data set. So I'd imagine most of the use cases that you've seen are just people using it out of the box. But I wonder, have you seen anyone, or would you recommend additional fine tuning, like say on your own company's logs, maybe to make it even more personalized and potentially better?
Yes, that is actually exactly what I recommend. So the model I've hosted is trained on this public data, but we've trained models on our own company data, and that's much better.
Cool. So you even have like a sense of how much it can improve performance just for this, for NVIDIA specific data, but so it's pretty significant then.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, I think the issue that I had in finding this like log training corpus is there's just not a lot of like, they're like, oh, we dumped, a gigabyte of like web logs or something, and it's like they're really similar and they don't really represent like a lot of heterogeneity that you would see. And so if you have the data, like, and you can really collect like a lot of heterogeneous data from your organization, I think it would be really, really powerful. Another thing is I use BERT, but there's Electra, which is really similar, but it's a lot smaller, and the training time is a lot less. So if you're worried about like just the GPU costs of like training your own large language model, you can use Electra, and it'll be like way faster. But yeah, the end goal of every organization in my like dream world is like you have your own curated data set that's individualized.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
If no one else has anything, I have a couple more. Okay, so yeah, another thing I was wondering about, and in particular, what I've seen to be a problem, I do a lot of deep learning for time series forecasting, by the way, but for instance, when I use GPUs, unless I like, which are costly, it's like, unless I like batch all my data together in like ridiculously large batches, I see that I'm not even utilizing like the GPU to the fullest extent. So a lot of the GPU memory is going to waste. So I was wondering, does Rapids, is it possible, or do you have any suggestions for like using the GPU better? So maybe do more data preparation for the next batch in the background while the model is propagating through, or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say, yeah, like GPU's advantage is like this parallelism. So if you're doing one-offs of anything, like you won't see these like rapid accelerations that we see. So you do need like a large volume of data. Something that I was talking to the breakout group before the talk with Adam is there's a thing called Triton Inference Server. And it's another open source NVIDIA project, but you can host your deep learning models on it. And it has a scheduler. So you can host multiple models on this server. And essentially you can do the pre-processing client side or on the server, but it like keeps track of like, just like you said, like the GPU saturation. And it does like an auto scheduler and dynamic batching. So if you don't have the throughput, if you're not like collecting enough data and there's not enough data like going through, then like it won't saturate. But if you just have, you know, sort of like a long line of things waiting step by step, if you can pick out the bottlenecks and move those all to this like Triton inference server, then it should help you with that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, the other thing I guess is related, but another thing I've noticed is, yeah, the model will actually run the, say, like initial training fast, but when it gets to like an evaluation set where it's trying to decode and like say decode like 336-hour forecast in the future, then like it jams up and it becomes really slow. So I mean, I'm just looking for ways to maybe transfer decoding actually back to the CPU, because that's sequential, and then meanwhile continue training another model on a hyperparameter sweep on the GPU.
Yeah, yeah. If you haven't checked it out, I would definitely look into Triton.
Okay, thanks. I'll look at that.
Great. If we don't have any other questions specific to the talk, we could, so it's just about 8:15. We have about 15 minutes until the end of the event. We could all stay in this larger group and just talk amongst ourselves as a whole group, or we could go into a couple of breakout rooms. So let's vote with reactions. I guess there's a poll. I think it's easier to vote with reactions. So use the clapping emoji if you want to go into breakout rooms, and use the shocked face emoji if you want to stay here and just chat all amongst ourselves. Okay, so it is now looking unanimous to, the second option was to stay here, right? Okay, great.
Yes, I pivoted under peer pressure.
Yeah, I saw that you changed yours. And a couple folks are dropping off as well, so it's a little bit of a smaller group.
I'll throw random things into the thread to see if anybody. I know John, you answered my question in the Meet chat, or in the